The Echoes of a Stolen Childhood, Chapter 1, The Whispers of a Lifelong Search, May 2025. The rain, a familiar melancholic curtain, veiled the sprawling cityscape of Portland, Oregon. Inside my small, cozy home, nestled in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, the only sound was the gentle tapping of raindrops against the window pane and the low hum of my laptop. I am Sarah, 57 years old. For as long as I can remember, my life has been defined by an absence. A gaping wound that time, despite its relentless march, had failed to heal. My sister, Lydia. It happened in 1970. I was 7 years old, a curious, watchful child. Lydia, my little sister, was just 2, a toddler with a mop of bright blonde curls and eyes like summer skies. She was a whirlwind of joyous energy, a tiny laughing shadow that followed me everywhere. And then, one ordinary afternoon, from our backyard in a quiet Portland suburb, she vanished. Just gone, without a trace. The ensuing years were a blur of police investigations, desperate searches, televised pleas, and the slow, agonizing descent of my parents into a grief so profound it consumed them. Our home, once filled with laughter, became a mausoleum of unspoken sorrow. My mother, once vibrant, withered under the weight of the unknown. My father, once a tower of strength, crumbled, his spirit broken. They died years later, separately, each carrying the silent, crushing burden of a missing child, a mystery unsolved. I was left alone, the sole keeper of Lydia's memory, the older sister who had failed to protect her. A guilt, cold and tenacious, had clung to me ever since. But with that guilt came a fierce, unyielding resolve. I would find her, no matter what. For 55 years, that promise had been the driving force of my existence. I had followed every lead, chased every phantom, endured countless false hopes and crushing disappointments. I'd spent endless hours updating Lydia's profile in national missing persons databases, poring over age progression photos, reading heartbreaking stories of other families haunted by similar losses. I'd submitted my DNA samples to every new genetic genealogy service that emerged, hoping for a flicker of recognition, a distant relative, anything. The internet, a tool of unimaginable power, became my constant companion, a digital library of cold cases and desperate pleas. I connected with online support groups, sharing the raw, unvarnished pain of a missing sibling, finding solace in the shared grief of others who understood. This year, driven by a renewed sense of hope, I had decided to try a new, more advanced DNA test. It promised a deeper, more sophisticated analysis of genetic markers, potentially uncovering more distant or previously undiscovered relatives. It was expensive, the wait was long, but it was another stone unturned, another chance. Weeks turned into a month, the quiet hum of my laptop, the rhythmic drumming of the rain, and then a notification. A small, unassuming email icon glowing on my screen. DNA match found. High confidence. My heart, accustomed to the slow, steady beat of quiet hope and predictable disappointment, suddenly seized. It leaped into my throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My breath hitched. My hands, cold and trembling, hovered over the mouse. This could be it. This could be her. After all these years, after all the pain, it could truly be her. The decades of longing, the silent prayers, the unwavering belief, it all culminated in this one moment, this one email, promising a thread, however fragile, to the past that had stolen my sister. The world outside, veiled in rain, felt distant, irrelevant. Only this quiet, terrifying, exhilarating moment. Chapter 2. A glimmer of Claire. The click of the mouse was deafening in the sudden silence of my apartment. The screen refreshed, revealing the details of the match. My eyes scanned the text, blurring slightly from the sudden rush of adrenaline. Genetic match, full sibling. Confidence, 99.99%. It was her. It was truly her, my sister. The words swam before my eyes, then coalesced into an undeniable, breathtaking truth. The profile belonged to a woman named Claire Miller, age 55, location, Eureka, California. A small coastal town nestled amidst ancient redwoods, hundreds of miles south of Portland. Lydia, Claire. The names felt alien together, yet inextricably linked by the undeniable language of DNA. I clicked on Claire's profile. A small, almost blurry photo appeared. A woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Her hair was a slightly darker blonde than Lydia's had been, but the shape of her face, the curve of her jaw, a profound, aching familiarity. It was the face of the toddler I had lost, aged by decades, but still unmistakably her. My hands shook as I typed a message, my fingers fumbling on the keyboard. "Dear Claire," I wrote, trying to keep my tone neutral, calm, to suppress the tsunami of emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "My name is Sarah Holmes. My DNA test indicates a full sibling match between us. My younger sister, Lydia, went missing from Portland, Oregon in 1970 when she was 2 years old. I believe you might be her." I attached a link to the missing persons profile for Lydia Holmes, along with a few blurry, faded photos of my childhood self with a tiny, blonde-haired Lydia. It felt surreal, like sending a message into the void, unsure if it would ever be answered or believed. Days stretched into a week. Each notification on my phone, each chime from my email, sent a jolt of raw hope through me, and then a response from Claire. Her reply was cautious, wary. "Dear Sarah," it read, "I received your message. I appreciate your situation, but I believe there must be a mistake. I am Claire Miller. I am 55 years old, and I know my parents. I was born in Eureka, California, and I have lived here my entire life. My mother, Judith, recently passed away. I'm sorry for your loss, but I was never kidnapped. This must be a misunderstanding." Her words, though polite, were a cold splash of reality. Of course, she had lived a whole life, a different life, with different parents, a different name. How could I expect her to simply accept this seismic shift in her reality? I didn't give up. I sent another message, then another, gentle, persistent, pouring out my story, my decades of searching, the grief of my parents, the undeniable scientific proof. I sent more photos, a picture of our parents, young and hopeful, holding tiny Lydia, a picture of me, 7 years old, beaming, holding my little sister's hand in our backyard, just weeks before she vanished. At the same time, I began to dig. I pulled out old news clippings from 1970, yellowed and brittle with age. I contacted the Portland Police Bureau. The case of Lydia Holmes, missing person, 1970. It was a cold case, buried deep in dusty archives. But one name stood out, Detective Robertson, the lead detective on Lydia's case. He had been nearing retirement then, a veteran cop, known for his dogged persistence. I found an email address for him, now a retired police officer in his late 60s. I sent him a detailed message, attaching the DNA results, the photos, Claire's cautious response. A few days later, Detective Robertson called. His voice, though older and a bit gruffer, held a familiar sense of authority. "Sarah Holmes," he rumbled. "I remember the case. Lydia Holmes. Haunts me to this day. One of the few I never solved. You say you found her?" His voice held a mixture of skepticism and a profound, hesitant hope. I explained everything. The DNA match, Claire's denial. He listened intently, asking sharp, pertinent questions. "This DNA evidence," he said finally, "it's groundbreaking. It could change everything. I'll pull the old files, see what I can remember. This is something I never thought I'd live to see." His commitment, even after all these years, ignited a new spark of hope within me. Finally, after several agonizing weeks of messages back and forth, of cautious explanations and Claire's hesitant questions, she agreed. I suppose I should meet you," she wrote. "Just to put my mind at ease, I have to know, even though it feels impossible." I booked the earliest flight to California, Eureka, the city by the redwoods. My heart pounded with a nervous anticipation that bordered on terror. What would she be like? Would she see me? Would she believe me? Would the little girl I had lost, the sister I had grieved for my entire life, truly be there, waiting for me? The answer, I knew, would either be the culmination of a lifelong search or another devastating heartbreak. I was ready for either. I had to be. Chapter 3. The Face of a Stranger. The Soul of a Sister. The drive from the Eureka airport to the quiet residential street where Claire lived felt impossibly long, each mile stretching time, making my heart pound with a frantic, suffocating rhythm. The giant redwoods, ancient and majestic, towered over the winding roads, their silence a stark contrast to the tumult in my soul. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. This was it. The moment I had dreamed of, feared, and chased for 55 years. I pulled up to a modest, well-kept house with a small, colorful garden. A woman stood on the porch, watching me, her posture guarded, her expression wary. Claire. Her blonde hair was shorter than in the photo, framed by lines of age, but the kindness in her eyes, the gentle set of her mouth, were unmistakably familiar. She was Lydia. A grown woman, a stranger, yet undeniably my sister. I stepped out of the car, my legs feeling like lead. "Claire?" I managed, my voice hoarse, thick with emotion. She nodded, her gaze cautious. "Sarah?" We stood for a moment, separated by the small stretch of lawn, and by 55 years of stolen history. The silence was deafening, filled with unspoken questions and the ghosts of 1,000 what-ifs. Then, slowly, she walked down the steps. Our first embrace was tentative, almost awkward. My arms, so long empty of her, finally closed around her. I felt her stiffness, her hesitation. But as I held her, a flood of memories, vivid and raw, assaulted me. The feel of her tiny hand in mine, her toddler laughter, the scent of her baby shampoo. This was her, my Lydia. We went inside. Her house was warm, lived in, filled with the comforting clutter of an ordinary life. Family photos on the mantelpiece. Claire, younger, with an older woman, presumably Judith, her mother. A husband, a daughter, a full life, a life I knew nothing about. I had brought a small, carefully packed box. Inside were the fragments of Lydia's early life. Yellowed photos, Lydia's second birthday party, her chubby hands reaching for cake. A lock of her baby-fine blonde hair kept in a tiny velvet pouch. A child's drawing, scribbled by my 7-year-old self, depicting me holding Lydia's hand, a bright sun beaming down, and the crucial item, a copy of Lydia's original birth certificate, showing her birth name as Lydia Holmes, parents Sarah and Robert Holmes, my Terrence names. I laid them out on her coffee table, my hands trembling. Claire sat opposite me, her gaze darting from me to the items, her expression a mix of bewilderment and growing distress. This is Lydia, I said, my voice barely a whisper, pointing to the 2-year-old in the birthday photo. This was you, Claire, with our parents, before you were taken. She picked up the lock of hair, turning it over in her fingers. I don't remember any of this, she said, her voice flat, emotionless. My mother, Judith, always told me I was born here, in Eureka. She said my father was a fisherman who died at sea when I was a baby. Her words were rote, practiced. I told her the story. The afternoon she vanished from our backyard. The frantic search, the police, the years of despair, my parents' quiet, agonizing grief, my lifelong search. I spoke for what felt like hours, pouring out the raw narrative of a family shattered, a sister lost. Claire listened, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She picked up the photo of my parents. They look kind, she murmured, a flicker of something new in her eyes. But then she stiffened. No, my mother was Judith. She raised me. She loved me. She was all I ever knew. Her voice was defensive, her denial a shield against the unthinkable. But I watched her, and I saw it, the tiny gestures, the way her nose crinkled when she was concentrating, the specific tilt of her head when she was listening intently, the quiet, almost shy way she would push a stray hair from her face. Little things, forgotten details, but so familiar from my distant memories of toddler Lydia. It was there, the essence of my sister. As I spoke, a subtle shift began to occur in Claire. She would occasionally look at a photo, then at me, then back at the photo as if trying to piece together an impossible puzzle. There was a dawning confusion in her eyes, a vulnerability that slowly, painfully replaced her initial skepticism. She didn't believe me fully, not yet, but she was listening, and some primal echo seemed to stir within her. My mother, Judith. She died a few weeks ago, Claire said, her voice softer, tinged with a recent grief. I'm still going through her things. Her house is full of memories. It's hard. A faint spark of an idea ignited in my mind. Judith, the woman who had raised her, the key to everything. I knew, with a sudden chilling certainty, that the answers lay in that house, in Judith's hidden life, and perhaps, in the very act of cleaning out her belongings, Claire might unknowingly stumble upon a truth that would change everything, for both of us. The next step, I realized, was not just about convincing Claire, but about uncovering Judith's secret, a secret that had shaped Claire's entire life, and mine. Chapter 4. The Diary's Unveiling. My first visit to Eureka ended with a fragile, uneasy truce. Claire had not embraced me as her long-lost sister. Not yet. The idea was too shattering, too disruptive to the reality she had known for 55 years. But she had listened. She had taken the photos, the lock of hair, the copy of her original birth certificate, and she had agreed to stay in contact. It was a beginning, however tentative. Back in Portland, I worked closely with Detective Robertson. The DNA match had re-energized him, given him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in decades. He meticulously pulled the dusty files of the Lydia Holmes case, re-examining every detail, every forgotten lead. He found old witness statements, long dismissed as irrelevant. A neighbor in our old Portland suburb, A woman with a keen eye had reported seeing a woman with a distinct scar on her left cheek, wearing a faded blue scarf, in the area on the day Lydia disappeared. The woman had been looking at houses. She had seemed out of place. The police had followed leads, but the woman was never found. Robertson now focused on this detail, a long-forgotten breadcrumb. Meanwhile, back in Eureka, Claire was grappling with her own escalating turmoil. The seed of doubt I had planted had taken root, and it was growing, rapidly, in the fertile ground of her mother's passing. Judith's house, now eerily quiet, became a landscape of unsettling discoveries. Judith had been a hoarder, a collector of small, seemingly insignificant items. Every drawer, every closet, every corner of the house was filled with layers of her life. Claire spent days sifting through it all, the physical act of sorting through her mother's belongings, a desperate attempt to sort through the confusion in her own mind. She found stacks of old magazines, dried flowers, countless little ceramic figurines, but nothing that explained my impossible story. Yet a creeping sense of unease began to settle over her. Judith had always been peculiar, overprotective, obsessive. Claire remembered a childhood filled with constant, unexplained moves from one small town to another, always a sense of urgency. Judith would pull her from school, pack everything in a hurry, whispering about fresh starts or bad neighborhoods. Judith had also been pathologically secretive, never speaking about her past, her family, or Claire's father. Claire had always dismissed it as her mother's eccentricities. Now it felt sinister. One afternoon, while clearing out an old built-in dresser in Judith's bedroom, Claire found a loose floorboard in the back of the bottom drawer. Curious, she pried it open. Beneath it, wrapped in faded cloth, was a small, leather-bound book, a diary. Judith's diary. Claire hesitated. Her mother had always guarded her privacy fiercely. But the gnawing doubt, the unsettling questions from Sarah, pushed her forward. She opened the diary. The script was cramped, frantic, sometimes barely legible, and it was immediately clear that the words were not those of a rational woman. The entries began years before Claire's birth, filled with a profound, almost desperate longing for a child. Judith wrote of loneliness, of a deep, aching void in her life. Then, abruptly, the entries shifted, becoming increasingly disjointed. Paranoid. They don't understand, one entry read, dated exactly 55 years ago. They don't see how she is suffering. Those people. They are not fit to raise her. She needs me. I am her true mother. I will save her. Claire's blood ran cold. Save her? Who was she? Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages. The entries meticulously detailed a plan, a trip to Portland, observations of a beautiful, neglected child in a backyard, the precise time of day, the simple fence, the quick, silent snatch. She came to me, Judith had written, her words chillingly delusional. She reached for me. She knew. She recognized her true mother. A profound, sickening wave of realization washed over Claire. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Yet the words on the page, the meticulous, deranged detail, screamed a horrifying truth. Then, at the very end of the diary, tucked into a loose pocket, Claire found it. A yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline, stark and bold. Toddler vanishes from Portland home. Lydia Holmes, age 2, missing. A blurry photo of a tiny, blonde-haired girl, smiling, eyes wide. It was her, the same child from Sarah's photos, the same child in her own current mirror. And beneath the headline, the small, almost imperceptible words, "Older sister, Sarah, 7, last saw her." Claire's world imploded, her entire life, a lie, built on a foundation of abduction and delusion. The mother she had loved, the woman who had raised her with fierce, albeit possessive affection, was a kidnapper. A disturbed woman who had stolen her from her true family, from her sister. She collapsed onto the floor, the diary and the newspaper clipping scattered around her, tears streaming down her face, raw and guttural. The pain was physical, a sharp, tearing sensation in her chest. She felt utterly lost, a stranger in her own skin, in her own life, betrayed by the woman she believed was her mother. And in a strange, twisted way, by her own lost past. She picked up her phone, her fingers fumbling, shaking uncontrollably. She had to call Sarah, the sister she had doubted, the woman whose desperate pleas she had dismissed. Her voice was barely a whisper when Sarah answered. "Sarah," she choked out, the name feeling both alien and profoundly intimate. It's true. All of it. I found her diary. I'm Lydia." Her voice broke, shattering into a million pieces. "And I don't know who I am anymore." The echoes of a stolen childhood had finally manifested, shattering the fragile piece of her constructed life. Chapter 5. The Unraveling Thread. The phone call from Claire, shattered and raw, sent a jolt of both agonizing pain and profound relief through me. "I'm Lydia." The words I had waited 55 years to hear, finally spoken, yet laced with such profound sorrow that my heart ached for her. I was on the next flight to Eureka. This time, there was no tentative embrace. Claire, tears streaming down her face, fell into my arms at the airport, clinging to me as if I were the only solid thing left in her suddenly fractured world. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," she sobbed. "I should have believed you. I couldn't imagine." "It's all right, darling," I murmured, stroking her hair, the same blonde as Lydia's, a little darker now, but still the same texture. "You had no reason to. It's a lot to take in. We'll get through this, together." We drove back to Judith's house, a silent, somber journey. The small, colorful garden now seemed to mock the darkness within. Inside, the diary lay open on the coffee table, a chilling testament to Judith's unraveling mind. We sat side by side, Claire trembling, as I began to read more of its disturbing contents aloud, stitching together the fragments of her stolen childhood. Judith's entries painted a terrifying picture. A woman consumed by grief and loneliness after a series of miscarriages, slowly succumbing to a profound delusion. She truly believed that Lydia was meant to be hers, that she was saving her from neglect, from a world where she wouldn't be truly loved. The diary detailed her meticulous planning, the watching of our home, the opportunistic moment of the abduction. It spoke of changing Lydia's name to Claire, a deliberate act of severing her past, erasing her identity. It chronicled their constant moves, Judith's paranoia about being discovered, her desperate attempts to create a perfect, isolated world for her daughter, away from the prying eyes of them. "She was always so watchful," Claire whispered, her voice hollow. "Always checking the windows, always telling me to be quiet if strangers were around. I just thought she was protecting me, being a good mother." A specific entry caught my eye, dated 2 years after the kidnapping. "Claire had a bad dream tonight. She cried for Mama and Tata. I told her they were just dreams, that I am her only Mama now. It will pass. She will forget." Claire gasped, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. "Mama, Tata," she whispered, tears welling up again. "I remember. I used to have those dreams. Vague images, a man's laugh, a woman singing. I always thought they were just a child's imagination." Her child's imagination was in fact the echoes of her true parents, a memory suppressed but never entirely erased. Just then, my phone rang. It was Detective Robertson. "Sarah," he said, his voice urgent. "I found something. An old report from a psychiatrist, Judith Miller. She was institutionalized briefly, prior to 1970, for severe delusional disorder, and what they suspected was a profound, untreated grief after multiple miscarriages. They released her, thought she was stable enough. There was a note: high potential for fantasy-based attachment, especially regarding children. It explains everything." He arrived in Eureka the next day, a man on a mission, determined to close a case that had haunted him for decades. He sat with us, his presence grounding in its authority. He explained what he believed had happened. Judith, consumed by her mental illness and desperate for a child, had likely suffered from a severe form of delusional disorder, perhaps even a manifestation of factitious disorder imposed on another, formerly Munchausen syndrome by proxy, where she fulfilled a psychological need by creating a child dependency, or more simply, a profound break from reality. She genuinely believed she was Claire's true mother, that she had rescued her. "She loved me," Claire said, her voice small, a fragile mix of grief and confusion. "I know she did." In her own way, Robertson nodded gently. "Yes, Claire. In her own twisted reality, she probably did. She raised you, provided for you. But it was built on a lie, a profound, criminal lie." He then revealed another detail from the old files: a very faint, almost imperceptible witness sketch from 1970. A woman with a distinctive scar on her left cheek, a faded blue scarf. "We never got a match," he said, holding up a blown-up image. "But looking at it now, and knowing what we know about Judith's past, there was a small, very old scar noted on Judith Miller's medical records, from a childhood accident, on her left cheek." Claire stared at the sketch, then at a photo of Judith from the diary, then instinctively touched her own left cheek, where no scar existed. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place chillingly, undeniably. The weight of the truth descended fully on Claire. Her childhood, her memories, her identity. All meticulously constructed by a mentally ill woman's delusion. She wasn't Claire Miller. She was Lydia Holmes, the lost child, my sister. We stood, two women, strangers and sisters, and embraced again. This embrace was different. It was an embrace of profound understanding, of shared pain, of a bitter yet undeniable reunion. It was an acknowledgement of what was stolen and a cautious hope for what could finally be rebuilt. The echoes of a stolen childhood had finally found their voice, a raw, undeniable symphony of truth and loss. The long journey, spanning 5.5 decades, was finally leading home. Chapter 6: The Unfolding Canvas of Identity. The days and weeks that followed the revelation were a fragile tapestry woven with sorrow, confusion, and the nascent threads of a new, unexpected connection. Claire, now grappling with the profound reality of being Lydia, was in a profound state of identity crisis. The woman she thought she was, Claire Miller, daughter of Judith, had evaporated, replaced by a ghost of a child she could not remember, Lydia Holmes. "Who am I, Sarah?" she asked me one evening, her voice raw, sitting on my living room couch in Portland. I had insisted she come stay with me. The familiar comfort of my home, her true childhood home, was now a place of both solace and disquiet for her. My entire life, everything I believed, it was a lie. How do I even begin to understand this person, this Lydia? I held her hand, my own heart aching for her. "You are still Claire," I told her softly. "You are the woman Judith raised, the woman who built this life, the mother to Emma. That part of you is real, but you are also Lydia, the child we lost, the sister I never forgot. You are both, and you get to decide who you become now, knowing the truth." Her daughter, Emma, 20, arrived a few days later, flying from her college campus. She was a vibrant, intelligent young woman, a true product of the digital age. Emma had, like me, been fascinated by genealogy and DNA tests, and it was her insistence that Claire take the deeper genetic test that had led to this earth-shattering discovery. She loved her mother fiercely and was utterly devastated by the truth about Judith. But her youth and resilience also allowed her to adapt, to understand. "Mom," Emma said, holding Claire's hand, "Judith loved you. In her own twisted way, yes, but she raised you. She gave you a life. And she gave me you. We have to accept that she was sick. And now, we get to learn about your real family, our real family." Emma's perspective was invaluable. She encouraged Claire to embrace both parts of her identity. She helped us organize all the documents: Judith's diary, the old newspaper clippings, Detective Robertson's final, comprehensive report that officially closed the Lydia Holmes case as an abduction. The report, now submitted to National Archives, detailed Judith Miller's history of mental illness and her desperate need for a child, confirming the crime, but also the complexity of Judith's delusions. The police had confirmed that Judith Miller had no other known family. She had lived a solitary, haunted life. My parents, their names now irrevocably linked to this tragedy, had passed without ever knowing the truth. That knowledge was a profound sorrow, a void that could never be filled. But at least now Lydia was home. Slowly, painstakingly, Lydia, she began to use this name, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, began to piece together her past. We spent hours talking. I recounted every memory I had of her as a child, her favorite toys, her love for my mother's lullabies, her tiny hand reaching for mine. I showed her old Super 8 home movies, grainy and silent, but filled with the undeniable image of a small, laughing toddler, unmistakably her. She watched with a mixture of awe and sadness, sometimes a flicker of recognition in her eyes, sometimes just a blank, aching space. She began to remember things. Not grand, vivid memories, but fragments. A smell, a sound, a feeling. I remember the smell of lavender and old paper, she said one day, from a book. My mother, Judith, she always kept lavender in her drawers, but this was different. I realized it was the scent of my mother's sewing box, filled with dried herbs and old patterns. And I remember a song, she whispered, a woman singing softly about a bluebird. My mother's favorite lullaby. Emma, with her tech savviness, helped Lydia create a new online identity, carefully blending Claire Miller with Lydia Holmes. They researched Judith's history, uncovering the tragic story of her lost children and her descent into delusion. It wasn't about excusing the crime, but about understanding the twisted logic behind it. The most difficult step was visiting my parents' graves. We went together, me, Lydia, and Emma. The headstones, weathered by decades of Portland rain, bore the names Robert and Eleanor Holmes, My mother, Eleanor, had a small, sculpted lamb at the base of her stone, a poignant symbol of her lost child. Lydia stood there, silent, tears streaming down her face. She reached out, her fingers tracing the engraved letters of their names. "Mama, Tata," she whispered, the words echoing the faint, long-lost memories from Judith's diary. It was a moment of profound, heartbreaking closure. For her, a delayed farewell. For me, a silent promise finally fulfilled. The journey was far from over. Lydia had a lifetime of memories to integrate, a fractured identity to mend. But she was no longer alone. She had me, her true sister, and she had Emma, her loving, understanding daughter. Our connection, forged in tragedy, was now blossoming into a powerful, unbreakable bond. Lydia eventually decided to officially change her name back. She was Lydia Claire Holmes, a blending of the past she had lost and the life she had lived. She began to volunteer at a local support group for adult adoptees and individuals with complex family histories, using her own extraordinary story to help others navigate their own journeys of identity and truth. I, Sarah, finally found peace. The heavy burden of guilt, the relentless ache of loss had lifted. My search was over. My sister was home. Our parents, though gone, could finally rest, knowing their lost child had been found. Brought back into the embrace of the family they had cherished, the echoes of a stolen childhood, once haunting, now resonated with the quiet, triumphant melody of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of sisterly love. Our story, once a tragedy, had become a testament to the fact that even after decades, truth can emerge, family can reunite, and healing can begin.